Hello and welcome once again to episode 23 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionists, Spencer
Hey there.
and Fernando.
Hello, hello.
So while we have your attention, a quick announcement. We are launching a community we are calling the Code Completion Club that we would love for everyone to join. We hope that this can be a great place to talk with us and other listeners about development, help each other out, and share the cool things that you may have made or come across. So all are welcome, and it's completely free to join. So please head over to codecompletion.io/join the club, all one word, to join the club. So that's codecompletion.io/join the club. It's hosted on a new chatting app called Quill, which is just like Slack, but like better in every way. Native apps, woohoo! So we hope to see you there. So before we get into our main topic, it's time once again for our indie app spotlight. Fernando?
Hello, everyone. So for today, we have three apps that we want to showcase. The first one is called Relate. It's a relationship manager, and it's pretty cool, to be honest. We'll post the URLs here, but it's basically think of contacts on steroids. So basically, you can have all your contacts, and you can add their categories. So if they're like close friends, if they're like acquaintances, things like that, you can. It has a really neat slider where you can set the contacts, like the relationship's health. So if something went wrong, you can move the slider and make sure that you remember next time not to bring up that painful topic. It's a really complete app. It's really, really cool. And it is brought to you by Samuel, damn, English is hard, Samuel Coe. I hope I didn't butcher that, Samuel. I'm really sorry. I'll say Sam Coe. Uh, and yeah, overall, if you have some chance to take a peek, you should definitely do that. The second app that we have is called Minimal MIDI Player by Peter, and it's actually really cool. The source code is up on GitHub, and it's exactly what the app's name is. Like it's just a minimal MIDI player. It's a very small MIDI player that's really full featured, and it's really cool. It has emojis. I love emojis. So you should definitely try it out, especially if you have a use case for MIDI player, like if you have an instrument that you play around, having a minimal MIDI player would be super, super useful. And finally, we also have Book Track by Simone Montalto. And this app actually reminds me of an old school app called Delicious Monster by Will Shipley. It's not exactly the same. Delicious Monster was more about finding your books on Amazon and keeping track of your library that way. And Book Track is an app that helps you keep track of everything related to your books. You can save quotes. You can track your reading and your progress. It even has like built-in statistics about how many pages you read and things like that. It's really, really cool, really well done. Has glowing reviews by some of really big sites like Mac Stories, 9to5Mac, and App Advice. So overall, go and check it out. If you do a lot of reading, I can definitely see how this would be super useful. And to be quite honest, I'm very happy that we're spotlighting indie developers. They are a great part of the community, and if we can do anything to drive a few downloads their way, we should definitely do that.
So if you're also an indie developer, reach out. Like, we want to hear from you, so that way we can also feature you on the show. There's a long list at this point, but we are slowly getting through it, and we're going to get through all of them. We promise. So on to our main topic. I wanted to ask everyone, what do you all do for backups? Spencer?
Yeah, I've done a couple things. As soon as I was sort of able to, afford my own backup solutions, I started to, because I had a couple instances where during high school, for example, I was really into photography and doing video production. So I accumulated quite a few files fairly quickly. And, you know, I'd just do the typical like, oh, okay, I'll throw it onto my computer. And then that quickly filled up. Got myself an external hard drive that quickly filled up. So in recent years, I, you know, invested into a network attached storage, or a NAS. I can't remember which brand it was. And that was really cool because, you know, I could access my files over the network and everything. And slowly, you know, I kind of learned about other solutions. Ultimately, everything I've used from then until now is a NAS. It's just whether it's sort of, you know, a pre-baked one, or something like FreeNAS, or as it's called now, TrueNAS. And now I just recently, about a month ago, switched over to Unraid for sort of various reasons, mostly app compatibility, a little bit more support there. But ultimately, as far as the storage goes, having something where I can have an expandable amount of storage, where it's not just, you know, your computer's hard drive, or having to, you know, dig through a box of different external hard drives, has been really nice, because it's always there, it's always running. So that's my preferred method. Yeah. What about you, Fernando? Oh, sorry.
I actually do have a NAS right here. I can show it to you guys. And it's been like this, a Synology. Please sponsor us, Synology. And I've had this unplugged for probably a year or so, because I basically almost don't do backups. And but the reason for that is that, like, for the longest time I bought a my first real work Mac was a first gen MacBook Pro, probably around 2011, 12. And it was a 256 gigabyte Mac. And since then, I've just been very tidy about my workspace, and I don't do photography, I don't do videos, I just do code. So I have like a single hard disk drive here plugged in that has a Time Machine backup and a super duper clone. And that's like a 6-month backup. I just swapped the hard drive. So nothing fancy.
Okay.
I don't know if I want Dimitri to go, because I'm gonna feel really intimidated by what he's going to say.
Yeah, both Spencer and Fernando know what I've been up to
Yeah.
recently. But especially with code, I just wanted to add, like, if you use GitHub or something like that, that is also an excellent backup. Yep. If you have iCloud, then most of your stuff that like might matter to you, like photos and stuff, that's kind of taken care of as well. So, like, unless you manually store files everywhere, or you end up doing stuff with like video and stuff like that, then you don't really need too much more than just a simple external like that for Time Machine and for like a bootable backup, if you do need to get up and going quickly.
Yep, I agree.
So like Spencer, for myself, I also had like externals over the years, and many externals. To the point where, like, I was digging through everything, and I found externals that were cloned of externals that were cloned of externals.
Yeah.
It went several layers. As I needed more space, I just bought like a bigger one, and then the old one became like a frozen in time backup of that. And they've slowly gotten more and more over the years. I always like jumped on the fancy connectors of the day, like eSATA. I remember on my MacBook Pro, you had the little PCI expansion port, so I got an eSATA thing that kernel panicked my thing all the time. Nice. But it was slightly faster than USB 2, so right. Like I went for it. There's a ton of them that just have like FireWire interfaces on them, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't have a cable anymore, and I never bought like the Thunderbolt to FireWire, so. Like, I just had so many of these like hard drives lying around that was I haven't really touched in forever. And most of my modern recent Macs, they had no backup as a result of that. I think I had the Time Machine built into the airport,
Yeah,
But
time capsule.
yeah, the time capsule. And I think that died like 2 years ago. And I'm pretty sure it was 2 years ago because Time Machine says you haven't backed up in 2 years. So that was like the constant nag that
Yeah.
I've been going through. Have either of you ever looked into like the online backups that are available,
Yeah,
like
I have,
Backblaze and
and
stuff like that?
right, yeah, like Backblaze.
Backblaze. Yep.
I have, but my whole thing was, man, if I want to store a ton of information, like multiple terabytes of information, videos, photos, whatever, it costs a lot of money. Where I could, if I have the money and I was able to, put up a little bit more cost up front, but then have it be something that I'm not paying monthly or yearly for. So that was what that's what when I was trying to figure out if I should do a NAS or not, that was kind of my reasoning was, well, long run, I'll probably spend less money.
Mm-hmm.
And, having stuff on your local network is definitely going to be faster than having to go, query your files from some online service somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And for like Backblaze, like it's like a $5 per computer per month kind of thing. That works fine if you have one computer. If you have a handful of computers, that gets expensive quickly.
Yep.
And the other downside, and that I don't ever see anyone talk about, is if you have like say one computer that you attach your big hunkin' hard drive onto, and that has all your video content or whatever. If you back that up to Backblaze, and that system crashes, you can get that data back from Backblaze in two ways: by downloading it.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert: downloading 16 terabytes is not going to happen quickly.
Yeah.
Not to mention that the connection will not, like, they won't hold your backup for more than 30 days. So if it crashes, you have 30 days to download that. They will send you a disk, but good luck getting a 16 terabyte disk that has everything in the exact like layout that you had it. It's most likely going to be an archive where it's not your folders as they were on your disk. It's here's a folder that's kind of zipped up ish, and they kind of just dragged it onto a disk for you. So they're not going to send you like a bootable backup of your system that you can then go ahead and use. It's just going to be your files. So if you're fine with your files in whatever organization they choose, then that's fine. But if you aren't fine with that and you need to get your data back after catastrophic failure, that's not really going to work. So like Spencer, I also wanted something that was a little more robust and local that I like could survive a catastrophic failure, especially since I haven't had a real backup yet, and I'm like really knocking on wood at this point. So Black Friday rolls around, and I finally decide I'm just gonna go all out, and I got two Thunder Bay 8s, which have 8 drives each, and I filled them to the brim with like 14 terabyte drives. So each is a clone of each other, and I'm using OWC's Soft RAID to kind of put a RAID together out of spinning disks, which makes it thankfully fast. And there have been a lot of issues, I should say, with this setup. I decided to do it at the same time that the M1 Max came out, so I was like, perfect, I'll buy an M1 Mac Mini. That will be the headless server for this NAS that I'm kind of setting up, and everything will be fine, right? What could go wrong?
We are never going to learn.
No. So for the uninitiated, Soft RAID is a kernel extension that will go ahead and directly communicate with the device, which is why it works so effectively and fast. That said, kernel extensions, they were not really something that you could develop on the DTK, especially if they require Thunderbolt, which wasn't available on the DTK. So Soft RAID was kind of out of luck in terms of their development process until M1 Max came. Spoiler alert, I got my M1 Mac before they did. And I learned via the forums that it was a process to just kind of get everything going. So my my hard drives more or less just sat there for the better part of 2 weeks as I was waiting for Soft RAID to become available, even in beta form, on the M1 Mac. So that was problem number one. Problem number two is everything needs to run on Big Sur, and Big Sur is brand new. And Big Sur being brand new means that there are certain bugs that crop up, especially with Thunderbolt on the M1 Max. So every few days, I would get a kernel panic from Thunderbolt saying, like, I don't know what was going on, and things just crashed. So that's fine. Updates came out, updated, everything working smoothly for the most part. Then Apple comes out with a Big Sur 11.2, which completely broke kernel extension support on the M1s, which means that Softread does not work, which means that I did not upgrade to 11.2, which means I'm stuck with some wonderful bugs in 11.1 and can't update until 11.3 hopefully comes out soon. So long story short, this has been an exciting journey, to say the least, in terms of getting a backup solution going. And I wanted something that, one, I could control. Like, I know how Macs work, so that's like a perfect little server that I can kind of set up. Like, Linux scares me, honestly. It's so easy to do something wrong and not know how to fix it because it's just like the wild, wild west out there. So I didn't want to do any sort of like fancy NAS. I was like, this is simple. This should work, right? How could this go wrong? So yeah. That has been my exciting journey, getting a backup solution. In it, I've really realized the limitations of an M1 Mac Mini as kind of a headless server. So each of these Thunder Bays takes up one Thunderbolt port, right? There's only two Thunderbolt ports on the back of a Mac Mini. I also have like a 10 gig network at home, at least for the computers I care about. For doing like video editing and stuff like that. If I want 10 gig networking on an M1 Mac Mini, I need another Thunderbolt device. So that can only be daisy chained on one of those Thunder Bays. So that immediately starts eating into the Thunderbolt budget, especially if I have a monitor plugged into that thing as well. That has to go into the other Thunder Bay, and all of a sudden there's no more Thunderbolt ports available. Now the good news is, for what it's worth, right now everything works, and that's something I'm very proud of. So I have two big hunkin' storage units that are just chirping away in the background. Everything is backed up over Time Machine over the network to those. Like, that's every computer in this house, which I finally have a backups, and I have a backup of those backups. I'm using Carbon Copy Cloner to just kind of exactly clone everything. I've learned via Carbon Copy Cloner that macOS Big Sur has certain limits in terms of how much file I/O you can do. At a certain point, you just like run out, and then the OS just kind of stops responding very well. And
Well, I mean, the
typically
bits, like the bits don't just grow up in trees, Dimitri. There's a limited, finite amount of electrons in this world.
The limits.
Physics.
The limitations.
It's physics. I'm
Physics.
sorry.
Yeah. And the reason why I was hitting this limit for the most part was because I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any bit rot, right? I have two of these big hard drives. Spinning disk is also known as spinning rust. It's rust on a platter, and you magnetize that rust, and that's how you save data. And over time, you lose information on that. So I wanted to make sure I don't have any bit rot, so I have Carbon Copy Cloner just run hashes every week to kind of make sure everything is good. And it turns out over 20-something terabytes, that's a lot of data to read, and that's when the OS would go kaput. So then I start like wanting to learn more about this bit rot thing and if it's an actual thing or not. You might know that APFS, which is the new file system that Apple came out with that's kind of tailored towards SSDs, works less well with spinning hard drives, so that's why I'm not using it. But they do not have any sort of checks in place to make sure that files are exactly what you saved them or not, because the SSD has it has parity checks for every sector that you write, basically. Now, this is something that the SSD firmware will manage for you, so the OS and the file system doesn't really need to take care of it, assuming the controller works well. Now, a spinning hard drive, you might think, oh, that has nothing. It's a primitive platter of Rust. Turns out they also have parity checks. So is bit rot an actual thing? Well, the verdict is kind of not so clear on how often it occurs, especially with HFS plus and things like that. There are some people who say they've had bit rot, but over time, the hard drive should know and should be able to correct certain types of errors. So whether these errors occurred with the hard drive just sitting on a shelf for years, or if they happen immediately upon writing that data, like it's not super well known whether it's one scenario or the other. So for the time being, I turned off that check on Carbon Copy Cloner because I don't think it was actually winning me anything, and it was taking forever, and the OS would die midway anyways. So for now, it's not doing that, and everything seems to be working fine.
Yeah, I'd say, and by no means am I an expert in any of this, but those checks, especially with new drives like you have, I'd say are probably not much of an issue. Myself, when I kind of put this NAS together, I bought a set of 8 terabyte hard drives. I think I have 6 of them, so 48 terabytes in total. But that was about 4 years ago. And I just had my first one die, and luckily, because of some of those checks, the smart checks, it was able to say, hey, your drive is failing, just so you know, you should probably do something about that, which was awesome. It sucks, and it was, it cost me $200 to replace the hard drive, which is not something I was planning on because they were just working fine, and then sort of out of nowhere, it started to crap out on me in a matter of 2 days. It went from fine to degraded to absolute failure, and it happened very quickly. Luckily, it was in a RAID setup, so I didn't lose any data. And I guess that's one of the big things is even if you do have bit rot in probably a single drive, you just get one bad drive, you're still backed up. Not to mention your other Thunderbait that is the copy as well. So they always talk about the like the 3-2-1 backup rule of you should have let's see, what is it, 3 copies of your data, so whatever your data is, and then 2 copies of it, and then you should have it on, I think it's 2 different kinds of media, so like a hard drive and I don't know, like a tape drive, or I guess
CDs.
An external drive.
A lot of
Yeah.
CDs for
Sure,
48
yeah.
terabytes.
Tons of, I mean,
Let's
get a
start
Blu-ray player at
delaminating.
that point. And then, one offsite backup. I think that's a little extreme. I have, just my computers and my NAS, and I call that good. I don't have anything so absolutely crucial that, it would be catastrophic if both my computer and my NAS went down. It's more of a convenience thing. But yeah, I mean, it's scary just to think, these spinning platters can just die at any time. So, like I said, and I can't remember if I said this, so sorry if I did, but when I was going through a lot of, video files and photography and stuff, there were a couple times actually that I lost like many, many, many gigabytes of data. And that's ultimately why I started doing this, was because I, lost some great photos and videos that I had taken that I really loved, and I was super sad that I even lost them in the first place. So my whole thing is trying to prevent that by, using iCloud, using my NAS, and having things, on a couple devices, because that was just the worst for me. I want to point out, though, like Fernando said, Fernando has just, development projects, code. There isn't anything large. I think what we're doing is a little bit of an edge case for me and Dimitri, where, if you're listening to this and you say, oh, crap, I need to do this, I wouldn't be so sure. It's nice and it's great. I personally love it. It was also a fair investment for me. Yeah, and you could get something like that Synology that
Don't do
Fernando
it.
has.
Don't, like, if you want this one, just tweet at us that you heard the episode and say, Fernando, please give me your NAS, and I'll think about it.
Okay. My point is, like, if you want to have backups, you can probably, pay a few dollars for, more iCloud storage and everything and call it good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I was mostly joking, but I think that it's great that you're saying that, because I'm looking at this NAS, and the only reason I bought it was because like I was like, oh, I think I also heard about the 3-2-1 rule. I was like,
Hmm.
well, I should at least have a few backups somewhere, and that way I could have my trusty spinning disk backup here, and then one uh, connected via the network. It's
Right.
just that, like Dimitri figured out too, sometimes the setup takes a while and it
Yeah.
can be complicated.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm like, and more than that, sometimes I'm just like, I'm lazy because none of these are just plug and play. Like, because even if you buy the discs, just plug and play the discs, connect the thing, connect it to your network, then you're like, how do I do this backup strategy, right? Is it going
Hmm.
to be a time machine backup into that drive? Is it going to be like a bootable backup? Am I going to schedule it weekly? Blah blah blah. And so the initial ramp up can take a while, and I think I've just been defeated. But now that I'm moving to my own place, I may probably just set this bad boy at the side and configure it once, and then just once it works, just set it and forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, the offsite backup is the only missing puzzle piece in my kind of current setup. Mostly because I'm just at home all the time, so I don't really have an opportunity to go take anything offsite. But
I
eventually,
have
I also want to get.
I have a
Go for
NAS, Dimitri.
Should we all just, share
Yeah,
each other's
yeah, we
NASs,
should do
and that would be great.
it. Fernando, do you have 97 terabytes free? I need 97 terabytes.
This is probably, I'm thinking around 4. So
Hmm.
we
4?
may need we may
Darn.
need a few more.
Okay, Spencer, I'll put a little bit on yours.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
of it, all the rest on Fernando's.
Sounds good. No, and I was even thinking like, something that I could do is if I really, really wanted to do the offsite backup is do something like, buy one of like the two base analogies or whatever, and leave it at my parents' house in their basement or something, right? Like that's somewhere that for me it's 15 minutes away, but it's also far away enough that like if my house burns down or whatever, I've got backups of whatever absolutely crucial data I need, and that's I think probably enough. And it's not going to cost much as far as energy goes.
Yeah, oftentimes that's the best thing to do. And also, one thing that we should point out is that bootable backups may not be something that we can do for very much longer. It seems like
Yeah.
they don't even work
Yeah.
on M1 Max anymore. So if you can get a time machine, that's probably good enough. If you can get a time machine to an SSD, then you're never going to even realize that it's doing anything because it's just going to be so fast and in the background. And SSDs, especially the little portable USB ones, are getting cheaper and cheaper nowadays. So I highly recommend that if you can just match the size of your computer, then you can just have a time machine of that. And if you need to get a new system out of nowhere, you can always recover from that, and the process is fairly seamless in terms of just getting everything back up to what it was pre catastrophic failure. So that I always recommend if you can get it going. It's
Yeah.
definitely worth it.
I definitely always think about, what would be the thing, what things would be the most, quote unquote, catastrophic to me. And I think for me, it would probably be my code mostly. And, luckily, all of the code I care about is on GitHub. So, like, that's much less of a worry for me. And I think probably most devs in general. Other than that, it's like, either LumaFusion or Final Cut Pro projects that I have, like that would suck to lose, but also not a huge deal. So again, like everything that I'm doing is more of like I'm interested in this and I like doing it as an ass and everything, but honestly, probably a little overkill and unnecessary, if I'm being honest. You know what I mean?
I mean, you
Well,
gotta count like the experience and the fun of it. Like
Yeah.
I was a bit of a downer,
Yes.
but it is fun. Like
It's
that's why I bought it in the first place.
No, I agree. And like for me, so to both of your point, it was, it is a fair amount of work, and especially like with free or true NAS, it was a lot of work. It's Linux. You do have to dive into the command line a little bit, which, for me isn't a big deal, but for some people is, like a huge blocker. And half the reason that I went to Unraid was because I kept doing that a lot and things just weren't working. And Unraid tends to be, from the about a month that I've had it, a lot more sort of, again, quote unquote, plug and play here, to the point where it felt more like that very first brand name NAS that I had, that it was like, put your drives in, and you're off to the races. You can install apps. So I've got it running, Plex and everything, and that's awesome. That's why I wanted it. So I don't know, in that sense, it's been really fun to like try something new. And it's ultimately less work. And now I'm just kind of kicking myself for not switching earlier, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I really wanted to stay on the Mac platforms that I'm comfortable with, because assuming that like it would all work, it pretty much does. It required very little setup to kind of get going. I literally put the drives in, plugged it in, turned SoftRate on, and said, make this a big hard drive for me, and it took care of the rest. And stability aside, and that's, since it's early for the hardware, early for the software, that's only going to get better. And then once it gets good enough, I'm not going to touch it pretty much ever. Yeah. And it's just going to continue working at that point. There's no apps running on it. Like it's just a file server, but because it's just a file server, everything can see it. Like you can get an app for the Apple TV that will just connect to your file server and show you your video. So one secondary project, now that I have a stupid amount of space available, is I've started ripping the Blu-rays that I have, for the single reason that when I watch the Blu-rays through the Blu-ray player, it doesn't go through the HomePods, which I'm used to hearing through the Apple TV. So I have it go. I ripped the Blu-rays at full quality. I mean, why not? There's space. Have them on the file server, and the Apple TV just accesses it and plays it just fine. I mean, I needed to wire my house up a little bit more. Wi-Fi didn't cut it for full quality Blu-rays, but hardwired Ethernet works just fine. So as Fernando said, it's the fun of the project, to kind of get this all working. Like hanging out in the weird forum posts, trying to get a back alley Blu-ray drive to be able to rip Blu-rays. Like that was all part of the process. I didn't know if it was going to be legitimate or not, but a package arrived one day and it worked. So cool. That's what it's all about, right?
I agree 100%. It's so cool. So this week's episode is brought to you by Underdog Devs. Underdog Devs is an organization of software engineers that support the formerly incarcerated and disadvantaged, and they help them transition into the software industry. Underdog Devs is going to organize an event for the month of April called Spring into Swift. Spring into Swift is a bunch of classes given by important members of the community, such as Kim Arnett, Kilo Loco, Sean Allen, Dave DeLong, and obviously your hosts here at Code Completion. The classes are meant to bring attention to the formerly incarcerated, and they're meant to help the community learn about the topics and grow and bring people from the outside so that they understand that mobile development is something that's worth pursuing. If you want to know more about it, please follow the at Underdog Devs account on Twitter, and they'll be posting more updates in the coming weeks. I think it's going to be a really fun event, so you should definitely attend. Thanks again to the Underdog Devs community and their Spring into Swift event for sponsoring Code Completion.
Now that we've gone through our topics, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. So we're catching up to real time with our recordings. So let's go over the Complete the Code from a few weeks ago once again. So we are calling malloc, so this is malloc, memory allocate, with an argument of 8 and saving the result in a pointer called my quote object unquote. what built-in way that doesn't require the use of an internet connection can you use to get documentation on many C functions like malloc? So there's a convenient way out there to just kind of get documentation for a ton of stuff, and it's just built in. So what is that way? You're not going to find it in Xcode. That's your hint. So please tweet at us with hashtag complete the code with your response, or wait for us to tweet it and then reply to that tweet if you want to wait for that. And we look forward to seeing your responses.
Yay.
So with all that out of the way, it's time for Compiler Error, a segment where I get to test my fellow completionists' knowledge about Swift, Apple, and all things development. And we have a theme today, and that is RAID, since we were talking about backups. So we have 4 statements. The first one is, so RAID exists in 7 standard levels, 0 through 6, all of which implement striping in various configurations, except for RAID 1, which implements a full mirror of the dataset instead of using striping. Statement number 2, originally referred to as a redundant array of inexpensive disks, RAID was renamed to redundant array of independent disks by industry manufacturers. Statement number 3, despite the existence of standardized RAID levels, implementations of those same RAID levels are completely proprietary, and no interoperability between major manufacturers currently exists. And statement number 4, a cousin of RAID, MAID, or Massive Array of Idle Drives, is an architecture that uses hundreds of drives where latencies can be very high, but operational costs may be much more manageable since not every drive needs to be online at any given time. So we have 4 statements. Spencer, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Okay. At kind of first glance here, number 1, just thinking about the RAID levels, I'm not entirely familiar with them, but I know that RAID 0 tends to be sort of more of a speed-focused RAID level where it would, as far as I know, do a full mirror in order to allow both drives to be sort of written to and or read from at the same time. Not RAID 1? Or maybe RAID 1 does as well. I'm not sure. I'll come back to that one. Number 2, I think, is correct. I've heard that before. Number 3... Yeah. I maybe tend to believe this. I don't think that you can kind of just, take a bunch of RAID drives from one system and throw it onto a completely different one. That sounds right to me. And then MAID, yeah, that one's interesting. So I think for me it's between 1 and 4. I'm not quite sure. I've never heard of that, but I mean, I guess it makes sense. I don't know. I'm going to go with number 1. That was kind of my first. I think this is one of your classic, the detail, the devil's in the details type of things. So I'll go with 1.
It's always the details.
That's true.
Fernando?
I don't know. I'm with Spencer. Number 2 sounds like it sounds familiar. Number 3 feels familiar too. Number 4 sounds like it's made up. Totally, completely. But the issue is that like Spencer, I don't remember if I don't think there's 7 levels of RAID.
I think there's a bunch of levels.
There's a
RAID.
bunch. No. I agree. There's a bunch. But I don't think there's 0 through 6.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think they're like 0, 1, 0 plus 1, 1 plus 0.
Yeah.
And then 5.
Then 10.
Yeah. So
yeah, good point.
I'm not entirely sure. MAID sounds like I would need to think of a really good use case, because otherwise,
yeah,
like very high latency, nobody wants high latency. Unless it's like super important information, but then it wouldn't be like disk drives, it would be tapes.
Yeah, it would be tape drives, exactly.
Yeah. So this is a hard one. Okay, let's let's do this. I'll go for number 4. You go for number 1.
Okay.
And
Sweet.
we're sure to get Dimitri.
One of us will win.
So, 4
there's-
final answer. Yeah.
There's a concept of a sweep. So if you both choose the right one, then you completely swept me and gone the
Oh.
right thing. But if I have tricked both of you, then
It
that
is
also
also a
works.
sweep.
So which
Okay,
is this one?
wait. That's pretty good. That's
No,
a
too
pretty
late.
good point. It's like you just
So-
said, well, you kind of won, and kind of winning sucks.
Kind of makes sense. So let's start with number 4. So
Oh,
Fernando,
no.
you have your doubts as far as if I made or not, or if it's actually a system of disks that automatically clean themselves up, hence the made. But it is not that. It is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a massive array of idle drives. The reason why this would be useful is if you wanted something that's a bit faster than tape drives, but about the same in terms of cost for operation. So if you have hundreds of drives, you typically have a very large NAS set up, for instance, and you may want to prioritize storing information there and writing information rather than reading it. So you might read it every now and then, but you want to send a whole bunch of information in that direction for things like backups and archives. And it's an alternative to running a tape system because it is faster. You don't have to wait as long.
Also,
But you don't
it's not a massive array of idle drives. It's a massive array of idle disks.
disks, drives.
no. In code completion, I have to be on my toes. But I'm kidding. I would have gotten it wrong anyway.
I guess
I'll
to
give
be
you a
fair,
tenth
you
of
could
a
also.
point.
There you go. I guess to be fair, that would also, aside from maybe being faster, I'm just guessing here, but you could also have like non-sequential
Oh, that's true.
reads and writes. That would also be kind of an advantage over tape.
Yeah, definitely. Because tape, you essentially have one or a few drive heads that are going and reading individual tapes, but the little robot has to kind of travel, find the tape, bring it over, copy all the information to a hard drive, and then you can access it. So it takes quite a while for that whole system to kind of go through. So it was good of you to be hesitant for that one, but that is an actual thing, surprisingly enough. So going on to number 3 in reverse order. So despite the existence of standardized RAID levels, implementations of those same RAID levels are completely proprietary, and no interoperability between major manufacturers currently exists. Now, unfortunately, it's not that no interoperability at all exists, because there is a standard that goes beyond just the standardized RAID levels, and that's the common RAID disk data format. And that exists explicitly, so that way a basic level of interoperability between different suppliers can exist. So I didn't know this either. I was under the impression that, like, hey, you buy RAID from one manufacturer, it's never going to work with anyone else's, because it's up to everyone to kind of do their implementation. But it seems like since the early 2010s, at the very least, they have been trying to improve that situation, and that they have been actively doing that. So this is a disk data format called DDF, maintained by the SNIA, which is the something. I don't have it in front of me.
That checks out.
That checks out. And they have a standard. They also manage the standard levels of RAID, and they manage all of that. So that is our compiler error for the week.
Oh, no.
Which means that continuing through, originally referred to as redundant array of inexpensive disks, was the original name for RAID. And it was later renamed to independent disks, as those disks were no longer inexpensive. I'm guessing. Probably manufacturers didn't want to have inexpensive in the name of their product that they were kind of pushing. So that's probably the more real reason why the name was changed. But originally it was a redundant array of inexpensive disks. That way you can do cool things and make a bigger disk than what was possible. I'm assuming the original uses of RAID were to make a larger volume than you had available, rather than optimized for speed, which we now use them primarily
Absolutely.
for. We want our spinning Rust to be even faster, especially since they're way less expensive than an SSD of the same size. So you can get a ton of storage on hard disks. You just need to go ahead and have the space for them, pretty much. The rest can be in hardware, software. You can get very fast speeds out of them at the same latency, but not as fast as SSDs, but almost as good. Which brings us to number one. So, Spencer, you had your doubts as far as which one was the full mirror. Unfortunately, RAID 1 is the mirror, and RAID 0 is the stripe.
It does stripe still.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh.
so RAID 1 will go ahead and put like byte A on one disk and byte B on disk 2,
Right.
byte C, byte D, byte E, byte F, and so on and so forth. And that's why it's faster, because you
Oh.
can read from 2 disks at the same time and get double
Right.
the
Oh,
throughput.
but RAID 1, if you lost one, you'd still be okay because
Yep.
they're both
Yeah.
mirrors.
RAID
Okay.
0, if you
Yep.
lose
I
one, you're
gotcha.
kind of screwed because you lost half the information there.
Yeah.
RAID 2, I believe, does a bit stripe. So it will put 1 bit at a time on each of them. RAID 3 does some weird thing where it stripes. I'm forgetting now. Fernando, it looks like you have it in front of you.
Yeah, I have it open. It's just a bunch of stripping. Like, we're nerds. We do different bits and bytes, block level stripping. In general, it's just like you said. Like, the most commons are 0, which is striping without mirroring, 1, which is full mirroring, and then 5, which is block level stripping with parity.
And the
what I
parity
was
is mixed in with all the drives. Whereas on
Yep.
4,
Right.
you have a dedicated drive for parity, and 6, you have two. You have double the parity, so you can lose 2 drives basically.
Yeah,
So-
and what I was thinking was the nested arrays, which is 0
Yeah.
plus 1, where you have like 4 drives and 2 of them are mirrored, but within the mirror they're rated 1, so they're no, it's rated 0, so they're like stripped. So a pair is stripped and copied, stripped below, so you can list I think 1 drive, things like that.
Yeah, it gets complex fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's like RAID 50, RAID 60, RAID 100 if you want to double it up again. But it's all so you can get more and more performance basically, and hopefully not lose data at the same time. Good job to neither of you, unfortunately.
Foiled
Good thing
again.
You didn't side with Spencer or Fernando. So you at least distributed the wins
shame.
there, the shame there.
The lesson is never try.
Yep.
Never try. Always try. You never know when you'll get it. That's the real lesson here. So as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. And feel free to tweet at us if there's a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Please feel free to join our new community that we're starting up. That's codecompletion.io/join the club, all one word. So we're all going to be on there, and we hope to see all of you on there too. And hopefully we can build something awesome together. And once again, I want to give my thanks to Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior. That's FROMJRTOSR on Twitter. And Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SPENCERCCURTIS on Twitter. And we want to give our thanks to Underdog Devs for sponsoring our show. And we will see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.